institutions, meeting with both the leaders and the employees of those important organizations. And if you follow the embassy on Facebook, you have probably seen pictures of some of those meetings. I had the pleasure of visiting the Internal Audit Agency, General Auditing Commission, Financial Intelligence Agency, the Public Procurement and Concessions Commission, and the Liberia Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. And several of these organizations print very, very interesting and helpful documents. So if you've never seen these, I recommend them highly. They're very useful, and they can be useful in the work that you do. This is the annual performance report from the Auditor General. It has very specific information about the findings that they have from their investigations, so I think you'd find it very interesting. These were not my first meetings with Liberia's integrity institutions, nor will they be my last. One of my purposes for this recent round of meetings was to assess whether the integrity institutions had seen improvements in accountable governance in the aftermath of the U.S. Treasury Department sanctions announced just this past August. Based on these recent meetings, I have three main takeaways I would like to share with you today. Takeaway number one, Liberia will not prosper without well-functioning integrity institutions. Over the past 20 years, the United States and Liberia have worked together to build a prosperous Liberia for the future of all Liberians. After years of war, Liberians came together in 2003 to rebuild the nation's democratic institutions, as well as safeguards for protecting its democratic governance. Chief among these safeguards were Liberia's integrity institutions, which were built, funded, and staffed with some of Liberia's best and brightest minds. These institutions were created by law and designed to be shielded from political interference. In combination with a robust civil society environment and a vibrant free media, they give Liberia unique strengths in maintaining its democracy. As Liberia built its post-war foundation on democracy and the rule of law, the international community took notice, and multinational businesses returned to Liberia's shores. And gross domestic product growth accelerated from 2003 all the way up to 2011. However, over the past decade, momentum shifted. And as Liberian leaders gave less political and financial support to the nation's vital integrity institutions, the economy slowed, corruption increased, and international business began to look elsewhere for investment opportunities. And I believe that these trends are related, that there's a direct correlation between the health of Liberia's integrity institutions and the health of the Liberian economy. Well-functioning integrity institutions reflect a country's commitment to the rule of law, giving both foreign and domestic investors the confidence they need to invest and keep their money in Liberia, and to lay the foundation for Liberia's future prosperity. Liberia's economic potential remains enormous, but this will not be realized without the accountable, democratic governance that Liberia's integrity institutions are meant to promote. Takeaway number two, Liberia's integrity institutions need more resources. Liberia's integrity institutions need more resources to fulfill their legal mandates. I found that, for the most part, integrity institutions are staffed by hardworking, dedicated people motivated to make Liberia a better country. Unfortunately, I also saw that many of these essential organizations have much smaller budgets than they enjoyed years ago, and even less purchasing power thanks to inflation. And to make matters worse, most of them never received the full amounts appropriated to them by the legislature. Starved of funds and unsure whether or when they will receive their next allotment, they are nowhere near as effective as they should be, and in some cases, funding shortfalls are more than 50%. 50% of the amount granted to them in the national budget. In many cases, these funding gaps lead to major cuts in operational funds, leaving the integrity institutions without fuel for vehicles or laptops for investigators and audits. If the goal is for more efficient, effective governance and genuine oversight of service delivery, I strongly encourage the legislature, now that they've received the draft budget from the administrative branch, I strongly encourage them to increase the budgets of these institutions. But at the very least, the legislature should exercise its rightful fiscal authority, which is only granted to them in your Constitution. Only the legislature can appropriate money. By ensuring that the amount appropriated to these organizations is the amount they actually receive. The executive branch, through the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning, is responsible for distributing funds to government entities through what we call allotments. But that ministry has no authority to alter the amount determined by the legislature in the annual budget. Yet in many cases, budgeted amounts are changed and allocations are further reduced, often without prior input from the legislature. I call on Liberia's legislative and executive branches to work together to ensure that Liberia's budgets, which have the force of law, are honored, and that Liberia's integrity institutions receive their full budget appropriations. I hope that Liberian lawmakers are regularly meeting with the Ministry of Finance to ensure that government expenditures are in line with the national budget appropriations. And I urge lawmakers and civil society to hold the government accountable for any deviations. Takeaway number 3, Liberia's integrity institutions cannot succeed without political will. My final takeaway is that Liberia's integrity institutions cannot succeed without robust political backing for their work. Democracies are only as strong as their institutions that provide checks and balances. And Liberia's integrity institutions are vital to curbing corruption and ensuring good governance. We have a saying in America that you have to put your money where your mouth is. Meaning in this context, that Liberia's leaders can show their support of their integrity institutions by backing up their words with funding and actions. It's one thing to say that you support the work of public auditors, but it's another to allow full and complete audits and then to respond to the deficiencies they uncover, like the deficiencies, very specific deficiencies in this report here. I haven't heard a single thing from anybody. It's one thing to say that you support corruption investigations, but it's another to allow investigations to be undertaken without political interference. It's one thing to say you want transparency in Liberia's extractive industries, but it's another to publicly disclose all government extractive industry concession and exploration agreements and revenue, publicly calling out illegal actors. It's one thing to support the code of conduct, but it's another to enforce compliance with asset declaration requirements that exist. They are the rule of law. Who's enforcing them? So by now, I think you've gotten my point. And I'll conclude by saying that Liberia's integrity institutions urgently need political will to fulfill their mandates. Integrity institution leaders told me that the U.S. Magnitsky global Magnitsky sanctions, they have given them more breathing room to fulfill their mandates. However, they need more than just breathing room. They need the full backing of Liberia's political leaders. In this election year, I urge Liberia's leaders to be bold in support of Liberia's integrity institutions, as their fate will strongly influence the fate of the nation. My last point today will be about Liberia's financial institutions, another key factor in the health of Liberia's investment environment. Just as electricity customers obviously need to pay for the electricity they consume, those who take out loans must pay back what they have borrowed. Liberia has a reputation today as a market where well-connected borrowers don't pay back their loans, while microfinance borrowers of much more modest means have a laudable payback rate. Their payback rate is above 98%. That's outstanding. Those are the microfinance, the poorest borrowers. They have the highest payback rate. Strangely, it is wealthier customers who have stained Liberia's reputation. In some cases, rich business people with valuable property and ample resources stashed away in some other country are refusing to pay high-dollar debts that they accrued in Liberia. And when confronted with this fact, they even resort at times to threats against the bank officials. Let me ask you, how can the Liberia Bank of Development and Investment